It amazes me just how consistent Nintendo has when it comes to golf games. Not necessarily because they've all been good, surely there has been a couple stinkers here and there, but simply because it always seems much like tennis, it's almost all but guaranteed we'll see one for their next new system. Honestly, I think the Wii and Wii U were the exception. Every other system has had that designated Mario Golf game, and even now it still makes me wonder, why? Unlike the Mario Tennis series that is a lot more easily accessible and can be surprisingly action-packed and competitive with the right people. I mean, it's probably Nintendo's biggest and most popular sports series that isn't Mario Kart. But Mario Golf, on the other hand, no matter what they try to do, it's a much slower pace and bit of a personal game. I mean, sure, you can play with 3 other people, and it can be a fun time trying to get the best score. In fact, I'd argue Toadstool Tour for the GameCube is probably one of, if not the best golf game ever made. But at the end of the day, it's still a very slower paced and singular, not to mention personal experience. I mean, hell, I've spent a minute or two at points just making sure I'm making the best shots possible. And for some, that could be really boring. But unfortunately, that just comes with the nature of the sport itself. But what is it about this sport, in particular this game, that still manages to stand out? It's definitely nowhere near as polished or as intuitive as its sequel is. In fact, playing against computers can feel rigged at points, or just trying to gauge your shots are kind of brutal here. And admittedly, it has a very rough start for a single player experience. Only a couple courses and only 4 playable characters, with only 2 of them actually being Mario series veterans. It's very odd, but in a way, I think it ironically adds a lot of charm and identity for this game. First off, the random humans. Sure, for some of the sports games, this isn't anything new. In fact, the handheld games were usually all but guaranteed to have a couple of them before the Mii's were a thing. But Mario Golf is basically the only console game to make them a bit of a focus. Back then, Waluigi wasn't even a thing yet. So in a way, I guess it kind of made sense. You want to make a big roster, but you also want to make the playable characters make sense. Which Namco would throw right out the window when they made Goomba and Paragoomba playable in a baseball game. But I do understand what Camelot was probably aiming for. And in doing so, it might be weird. And true, most of these new characters might not be winners. But you know what? It gives this game an identity that'll make fans remember it for years. And hey, not all of them were afterthoughts. In a way, I'm kind of surprised Plum never made a return for future titles. Somehow, I feel she'd be surprisingly a great fit for future games. Much like how everyone feels Pauline should be in every sports title now, to add that female representation. I certainly wouldn't be against it. Plum might have only appeared 1 game and in Smash as a trophy, but you know what? The girl left her mark. It's just a shame she's tied to this game, because after doing that episode on the Mario GameCube sports games, I forgot how hard this game is to get into and get a handle on it. Probably the first thing you'll be doing is trying to unlock more characters to play in single player. And as I mentioned in that previous episode, these can be really difficult. Every character you play against hits the ball harder than you, and generally increases in difficulty with each character. As a kid, this was definitely a brick wall for a rental. Back then, I didn't know it was possible for me to ever hate Luigi, one of my all-time favorite characters in any form of media. But man, did Mario Golf prove me wrong. Even after buying it on the Virtual Console, I had to use save states just to save time, just so I didn't have to start over and over and over from the beginning again and again and again. Fuck you. Mixed in with that awkward controls that takes a bit of getting used to, Luigi was surprisingly tough considering he's the first challenger in this mode. I'm just thankful the team had enough foresight to include more playable characters out of the gate in multiplayer, cause that would have ruined my weekend as a kid if I couldn't play as Luigi or some of the fan favorites, cause I certainly wasn't able to unlock them back then. Thankfully though, once you do get a handle on the mechanics, it can become easier. But despite that, there's quite a bit of a high entry point, and I'm sure that scared a lot of players who rented this back in the day. I know for me, it was certainly just a one-time rental. But that's not to say it's a bad game. If you're willing to put the time in, there's a lot to do. You got your tournaments with 6 different courses to choose from, character matches to unlock more characters as I mentioned, and a few other modes like speed golf or ring shot, and probably the most interesting mode that would never make it out of this game being mini golf. I get that in comparison, mini golf isn't anywhere as in-depth as regular golf, and for some nowhere near as interesting, but why get rid of the option to have it in the later games? It's like the perfect party mode that also serves as a great introduction to get players more interested. I remember very well, this was the mode that I played the most whenever I played with others, cause hey, who doesn't like a round of mini golf? It's like the perfect chill out game. Well, unless you're being overly competitive and then it's like, what the fuck are you doing? You usually play this while drinking beer, smoking a joint, jackass, calm down a bit. But yeah, in terms of value, this game isn't lacking in the content department, and for its time, it wasn't a bad game. Higher skill level needed aside, so the question becomes, would I recommend this game 20 years later? And well, that's kind of tough. It does stand out from the pack from Mario Sports history thanks to its character selection being part of a long-running series, and it's also very distinctly N64 era, which adds a whole lot of the N64 nostalgic charm that you're never gonna find anywhere else. But I've played what comes after this title, and yeah, there's no way I could ever recommend it over Toadstool Tour. Which, to be fair, is how it should be, as sequels sequel is supposed to be better than what came before, but it's a major improvement that makes this game obsolete in many ways. That being said though, if you can find this game cheap enough, I would still recommend checking it out for the hell of it. It might not have aged the best, but it's still an interesting anomaly for Mario Sports. Just keep in mind this is a very cautious recommendation. Be prepared to struggle a bit unless you luck out and find a copy that has everything already unlocked, or use a Game Shark or something. Or who knows, maybe you'll come to loathe Luigi as much as I did as a kid. Yes, suffer with me.